Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sangha Ocean Beach Online. Happy Sunday. I'm Brother Dave, and I'm so happy that you're here. As always, let's do exactly what we're all doing naturally and just start to settle in. First, taking care of our external environment, finishing any last-minute adjustments to our technology, making sure we have something to drink, that we're warm enough. And then very naturally, we bring our awareness back to ourselves, back home. And we start to bring our full attention to our body and its comfort. Listening mostly. Making any necessary adjustments. Assuming a posture that today, in my body, not somebody else's, will produce alertness with calm. For me, that often means sitting quite upright so that I can stay alert. But then to balance that, I also want to sit very softly. And I want my hands, for example, to be empty and at rest on my lap if I'm sitting, or on my sides if I'm lying on my back in the bed. And then I bring my awareness to my lower abdomen, just 2 fingers below my navel. The center of the body, as it's spoken of in traditional Chinese medicine. The Tandian. And again, I start with just listening. Nothing to do. Nowhere to go. We have gathered expressly with the purpose of being together, not doing together. And then as it exists for me today, I find that balance between a strong back, keeping me upright, alert, even feeling dignified as I bring my full self to moment after moment. And I balance that strong back with a soft front so that I'm not pushing away what I don't like and in a constant battle with the moment. But rather, I'm just letting it come, letting it land, accepting it in a loving and non-judgmental way, no matter what it contains. Again and again and again. And then in that place, from that seat, metaphorically, I touch gratitude. Usually from that place, it's pretty easy to be grateful for my body, to be grateful for my mind, to be grateful for my life experiences that have brought me to this moment, connected me with beautiful teachings and a beloved community to practice them with. What a miracle. And finally, I give myself some words. Breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. In, arrived. Out, home. Thank you, Sangha. Feel free to stretch out and unwind. So for those of you that are new, I typically give a talk now for about 20 minutes. And then we have a period after that for questions and answers and sharing so we can hear from each other about how our practice is going. Learn from the questions that we likely all share. Today's theme is the practice of gratitude. So let's start there, right? I didn't say the philosophical notion of gratitude, the object of gratitude that I can cultivate or hoard. It's a practice, like everything we talk about. It's not an idea. It's not a concept. It's not a word. It's a practice. It's a practice. In general, we can talk about gratitude as having two different aspects. There's what I like to call easy gratitude and then hard gratitude. Easy gratitude is what we did together just now, likely. Right? When something positive exists externally or internally, whether it's joyful or nourishing or healing or clarifying, if we notice it, usually a little bit of gratitude arises, right? And we can water that, right? That is a practice unto itself as well. And we'll talk more about that. But that one's pretty easy. That one's pretty easy. But what I want to focus on today is what I call hard gratitude. And this is our ability to experience gratitude for the things that suck. Right? Not for the joyful, nourishing thing, right? But for the suffering thing, for the painful thing, for the embarrassing thing, for the frightening and confusing moment. How can we touch gratitude there? Because we can. Because we can. So in order to get to that practice and how we can understand it, right, let's unpack why that's so hard, right? Because that's hard for me. I'm sure that's hard for all of you. That's why I call it hard gratitude. So let's unpack why. Why is that so hard? The reason is because we have a misunderstanding, myself included. I'm working on it, and I'm going to help you work on it too. Some of you may have heard of the middle way. It's one of the most ancient teachings in Buddhism. The way it's taught classically is the recounting of a story where the Buddha is hanging out with a lute player. You know, for our purposes, let's think of a guitar player, right? Stringed instrument. And the Buddha asks a few very simple questions. He says, guitar player, what happens if your strings are too loose? The guitar player says, Lord Buddha, no sound. He says, what happens if your strings are too tight? The guitar player says, Lord Buddha, bad sound. And the Buddha says, you see, this is the way with all things in life. Right? The most harmonious actions come from the middle way. Now, that's a pretty short teaching, which has left it over time open to a lot of interpretation, by myself included. When I first encountered that teaching, I completely misunderstood it. I had a very difficult and traumatic childhood into adolescence and young adulthood from a combination of factors. And I was being raised in an unsafe home environment with a drinking alcoholic. I was being raised in the 1970s in New York City, in the Bronx. So even stepping outside of my door was adventurous, and on and on. I also have that kind of personality. I have a personality that is and a makeup that's prone to extremity, that likes and feels comfortable in intensity. Put all those things together. I had a very bipolar life in my childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. Roaring highs and crashing lows, like manic episodes, intense, lengthy periods of depression, on and on. And so when I encountered, and I was suffering from this, I wasn't enjoying that. I did not celebrate these aspects of myself. And nor was society encouraging me to do so, right? It was labeling me and diagnosing me and otherwise encouraging me to see my circumstance as a problem. And that's how it felt. So it was very easy to accept that label from the world. Fast forward to my life as a yogi and a Buddhist practitioner, and I encountered the teaching of the middle way, and I thought, oh, yes, this is what I've been looking for. Here is the teaching to confirm what I already believe, that I am broken and that there's something really wrong with me, right? That I'm bad. Right? And even more so, right, the teaching offered, as I misinterpreted it, right, the vision of how I should be, right? Like whoosh, perfectly balanced on one foot, right? Breathing calmly, right? Somehow not extreme over here and not extreme over there, somehow whoosh, just balanced in the middle, as if I was walking a tightrope. This is not what the Buddha meant. This is not possible. I can tell you because I spent many, many years trying to do that. Punishing myself, right? Punishing myself. Every time I went too far that way or too far that way, out came the judge. Right? Oh, there you go again, being too this or not enough that. I did that and called it mindfulness for many years. It's one of the reasons that I now define mindfulness as paying attention with love. Because as you can hear, I'm sure so obviously, there was very little love in that. Those were years of abuse, abandonment, harsh criticism. There was very little embrace in it. Now, the way I look at the middle way is imagine a wide road, like 4 lanes going north and 4 lanes coming south and guardrails on the other side. And I'm driving my car down this road, and just in many ways, just as I was a young man, I'm often a little bit out of control. I have a tendency to go too fast and to take the corners too quick and to not really have good brakes. I'm using all 8 lanes. Sometimes my car still slams up against the guardrails. It's wild. It's a bit messy. And I love it. And I love it. It's who I am. I'm not trying to change that. I don't have a desire to cut my speed in half and drive very carefully down the double yellow. That's not the middle way. The middle way is accepting, wow, this is the totality of my experience. Sometimes I'm really happy. Sometimes I'm really sad. Sometimes I get it and things feel so clear and I'm so sure. And sometimes I am so confused, I don't even know where to begin. Just like the guitar, if the guitar string is too loose, does the guitar player throw the guitar in the trash? If the guitar string is too tight, does the guitar player smash it under his heel and burn it in the fire? And yet, this is how I have treated myself for many, many years. The guitar is designed to fall in and out of tune. It requires adjustment, attention, loving care, respect. Given those things, more often than not, it will play beautifully. And I am the same. We are the same. So what does this have to do with hard gratitude? I have to pull myself back sometimes. Yeah. Hard gratitude is so hard because we have this notion that some of our experiences are good and some of our experiences are bad. Some of our life is right and some of our life is wrong. And that is not the teaching. That is not the middle way. That is just another form of the very duality, the very separateness, the very othering that Buddhist practice is designed to dissolve. Remember, we are an ice cube made of the ocean, practicing to melt, held together by fear, trauma, ideas of a very small self, of a very small identity, forgetting that we are in an ocean of ourselves, completely connected to it at all times, never alone, never separate. So the path to this melting, right, can be found in the practice of hard gratitude. When we swing, when the pendulum swings to that challenging side, like, instead of punishing ourselves, bemoaning the situation, which can lead to panic, we can instead just stare down the monkey. Just look right at it with loving eyes, the way I see the grandparents that are visiting my neighbors next door looking at their 4-year-old and 2-year-old grandchildren. Those kids are on this pendulum, right? Laughing, crying, right? But I see the eyes of the grandparents and they are practicing the middle way, right? They are in acceptance of this whole arc, this whole beautiful arc of intense experience that their grandbabies are having. And they're just in loving acceptance. Yeah, how can I support? What can I help them learn? How can I help them self-soothe if they've been too upset for too long? Right? But these are helping, supportive discernments. Right? They are not punishing, blaming, judgment. And so we can practice this as well. We can, in that moment, when we realize like, oh God, this sucks. This is so hard. Whatever that is for you today. Financial stress, despair about the climate crisis, death of a loved one, regret, some past action that you can still feel the pain of. Whatever it is, you can just look right at it with love. Look right at it with love. And maybe in the beginning, when you take up that practice, it won't be easy or perhaps even possible to then experience a moment of gratitude, to in the moment be like, wow, this really sucks, but it's teaching me something I need to learn. That's not easy. I can't always do that. And so what I try to do is to hold that awareness all the time so that perhaps next week in my journaling, next year in a conversation with a loved one, I can touch it. I can be like, wow, that period there when that didn't go right and everybody was upset, that 9 months That was really hard. But wow, like I look back on it now and I can see how it made me a little bit stronger, how it opened my heart, made me a little bit more vulnerable with the people that I care about, how it put up a boundary because I was depressed and I didn't have the energy to do other things. And so I just focused on what was most important to me. And that actually kept me on the path and helped good from getting in the way of great during that time. And on and on and on. I would posit, and this may not always be true, but I think sometimes the things that are the most painful, the times that are the most difficult, are the ones that actually teach us the most, and that we have, perhaps many, many years later, the capacity to experience the most gratitude for. That has been the case in my life. That has been the case in my life. The hardest smacks upside the head the universe has given me have also been the most clarifying redirections. They were very painful, but they were also very obvious. Like, hey, wake up, knucklehead, over that way. And I couldn't always see it in the moment. But I have a confidence now because I sit, as I'm inviting you now to take up the practice of doing occasionally. And I sit with the things that are hard or the things that were hard. And I just breathe into them and I try to imagine myself looking at those moments and myself in them, past Dave, with the grandparents' eyes. Just like, yeah, what can you learn from that little one? Yeah, you're probably going to go through that one again. Get ready. Get ready. It doesn't have to be that hard next time. All right. So as I always try and do, I want to connect this teaching back to a very practical practice. And that's what Zen is all about. In this case, we're going to talk about the 4 practices of right diligence, another teaching from classical Buddhism. And it's very simple. 4 practices of right diligence. The first one is, and for the purposes of it, let's talk for a second about how Buddhism views the mind. An analogy in Buddhist psychology is, imagine your mind like a house, and it has a basement and a top floor and a ground floor, a basement and a ground floor, 2 stories. In the basement is a seed for every potentiality, a seed for anger, a seed for joy, a seed for jealousy, a seed for sadness. It's all there, right? We can all, as human beings, experience all of those mental formations. Then our life, right, our conscious life is above the basement. It's upstairs in the living room. And if, as I was, for example, I was raised around a lot of anger. And so I learned how to water the seed of anger. And anger came up through the basement floor into the living room and became a big, ugly tree in the room of my life. I didn't, as a young person, learn how to water the seed of kindness very well. And so the plant of kindness was this little blade of grass kind of sticking up in between 2 floorboards. Like it was barely there. And so the 4 practices of right diligence, sticking with this analogy, right, are designed to help us make our living room very beautiful. And so the first practice is, if something beautiful, nourishing, wholesome has arisen, well, keep it in the room, right? If when the wonderful welcome guests comes, we do everything we can to keep them in our house, right? We feed them, we give them wine, we tell them funny stories, we make them as comfortable in our favorite chair as we possibly can. Right? So the first practice is that simple. If a wholesome experience arises, try to keep it up. in your consciousness. Right? And the second one, somewhat obviously, is if an unwholesome experience arises, something negative, something challenging, well, don't water that plant, right? Don't feed it your time and your energy and too much of your attention. And like everything, everything must eat to live, and everything needs additional energy to continue. Everything. And so you take that energy away, that plant will wither and return back to its seed form in the basement. It never disappears, right? It never disappears, but we can diminish it. And so that's the second practice. Release and do not water the unwholesome when it arises. And then the third practice is do things that encourage the wholesome to arise, right? Don't just wait for the wholesome thing to come up and then water it, right? Water it in advance. And also, for example, I can't just expect that I'm going to walk into the kitchen and cook myself a delicious and wholesome meal if all I have in there are frozen foods and potato chips. I have to, in advance, right, at the market last week, make the decisions like, oh, I want future Dave to have a really delicious dal with vegetables and brown rice. Let me buy those 10 ingredients and store them. That's the third practice of right diligence. Right? Take actions that you know will promote the wholesome. And then the fourth and final practice of right diligence is very simple. Avoid the actions that promote the unwholesome. Right? So I don't wait to be 2 hours into doom scrolling, right? To try somehow then to pull myself away, right? Instead, that's so hard. That's so hard. It's like having the ice cream in my hand and not licking it. It's so hard. Right? So what I do instead is I set my phone very far away from where I sleep and where I spend the last part of my evening. Right? It's not even in my hand. It's not even in my hand for the last hour or two of the night, because I know that this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. I want to get those hits of love and connection, and I had to feel that safety, like, oh, I know what's happening. I'm connected. Right? Instead of the reality that, like, man, I could spend all day doing this and I still don't really know what's happening that I can't see in 3 dimensions. I'm just absorbing a whole bunch of stories that I have very, very few ways of truly vetting, that I know are being sent to me through capitalist machinery that has a lot of ulterior motives to giving me information, right? That is concerned about my attention and its value to them. So I know that this is not really going to tell me what's going on, but it makes me feel that way, right? It makes me feel that way. And so those are the 4 practices of right diligence. I recommend that you begin practicing them immediately, right now. Right? It's not an abstraction. If there's something in the room right now that is wholesome, full of love, nourishment, water it. Water your flower. If there's something in the room right now that is unwholesome, that is causing you pain, retract some of your attention from it. Let it rest and ultimately wither. If you want something wholesome to come into the living room of your life tomorrow, plan for it today. Take that action. Develop that habit. Create that reminder. Hang something by your bed that you will see upon first waking that says, "Smile, my dear." Do yourself that supportive favor for future you. And finally, take the time, sometime soon, in the next few days, and sit down and journal for 10 minutes with the prompt, what am I inviting into the living room that is hurting me? Make a list. Just that will be very illuminating. Right? But then take it one step further, because it's a practice, right? It's the 4 practices of right diligence. Pick one thing on the list and start to eliminate it. Start to eliminate it, whatever it is. Like buying that thing that I habitually overeat. Stop buying it. Stop buying it. Take an action. Take an action. I could talk about this for a long time, but I want to stop here, and I'll close by quoting something I love from the teachings of Baba Ram Das. He says, as a mantra, over and over again, I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. And so if you were to look at that phrase and think like, how can I put that phrase into practice? How can I do that? One of the answers is the 4 practices of right diligence. 4 practices of right diligence, right? That is being loving awareness quite actively, right? In all 4 of those circumstances. I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Sangha. So, as always, the floor is now open for questions about the topic that we've covered today, or just your mindfulness practice in general, because if you have some question, multiple people here are sharing the same question, I promise you. This is also a space where we can just share. If you'd like to just share with us about how your practice is going, something that you've been struggling with, or some benefit that you've been experiencing, it's quite nourishing for the Sangha to hear that. If you are not on camera, as I always like to say, you're very welcome to share or ask a question via audio only. That's totally okay. And with that, the floor is open. You can raise your hand. If I can see, you can raise your hand by waving. If not, you can use the technology of Zoom to raise your hand. I have a hand. I'm going to invite you to unmute. You can start by saying your name and where you're from, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm Josiah. I'm from Vermont, but I live in New Jersey right now. I have a great friend, Hayden, who actually introduced me to Brother Dave recently, just a few weeks ago. And I've already digested all of his videos. I've attended, this is the second Sangha that I've been to, and it's really been a great comfort for me. And I'd like to share that I've been practicing accepting myself and accepting others for where they are and what they're experiencing. Trying to do that as much as possible. I have been trying to share what I learned with I work for a big tech company for Cox Automotive and Dealer.com, if you know what all this stuff is. But I work as a team leader on a large team, and I've been sharing some of my practices and some of the teachings that I've been learning with my team. So I guess a question I have is somebody who may seem like they need help the most, but are the most resistant, how I can help them. Yeah.
Thanks, Josiah.
Thank you.
This topic comes up a lot, right? Because as we start to grow and we start to learn, very naturally, we want to help. We want to help. We want to share. Just like the more delicious the plate of food is, the more pleasure I take in scraping half of it off onto a plate for somebody else. The sharing makes the food even taste better. Right? As I share the Dharma, let me tell you, you're seeing that in practice right here. That has become my life, because nothing feels better to me than this. Nothing nourishes me more than this plate of food right here, and the communion, practice in communion. But as Josiah points out, very often, the person who we most want to taste of the Dharma, right, is the most resistant, is the hardest to get to accept it. I'm going to stick with the answer I love to give, because there's a lot of different ways to handle that, right? It's case specific. We could talk about communication styles. We could talk about love languages. We could talk about nonviolent communication, and how, if we study that, Marshall Rosenberg's work, we can dive into looking beyond what a person is saying and doing and seeing their driving motivational forces, which are usually their needs, and trying to parse out in our minds, like, well, what needs are they meeting by being that taciturn, or by being that judgmental, or by being that abrasive in conversation? And how can I help them meet those needs from the back, like, in some other way? There's a lot of practical ways, Josiah, that we could answer that. But from a mindfulness perspective, my favorite, and I think the deepest answer, is counterintuitively, in that moment, we're invited as mindfulness practitioners to lean backwards. To lean backwards. Right? Because the person who is having the hardest time, right, imagine them as having their hands full. They're overwhelmed. If they're acting out, if they're closed-minded, if they're communicating in a way that has violence in it, that can be viewed as their hands being full. Like, they can barely hold whatever they're experiencing. And is it appropriate then? Is it kindness to try to give them something else to hold? No matter how beneficial that thing is, right? No matter how much it's helped us, they're not ready. They're not ready. And so what do? Rather than like getting all up in it, right? We lean back. And we come home. We come even more powerfully into our own practice. Wordlessly often. We start by really facing whatever we're feeling as a reaction to their resistance, their suffering. And we take even better care of that. Why? 2 reasons. 1, our practice of coming home is what produces the clarity we need to take skillful action. That's the first reason. The second reason is when we take that step back and take care of our need, right? Because if somebody's really angry, for example, in a meeting, that might cross boundaries that I have. That might really hurt my feelings. That might frighten me. I have to take care of that first, because otherwise everything I do with that other person is going to involve somehow manipulating them into meeting that need for me. Right? Like, so if I get really frightened when people are angry and I don't take care of that for myself, then I'm going to spend my whole life going around telling angry people to not be angry. That doesn't help them and it doesn't help me. And so leaning back and coming home. So now I'm in a much better situation, right? I have a lot more psychological space. I can think more clearly, feel more sincerely, right? Inside of all that safety that I have produced for myself. And in certain circumstances, depending on how chronic and acute their behavior is, in our experience, right? Sometimes that may be just taking 3 breaths in the room, regrounding, and then speaking from a place of love and non-judgment. But sometimes it may mean like, peace, I'm out. I can't have this interaction. You're interacting with me in a way that's crossed the boundary. I need space to process what's just happened. I would like to, return to this 24 hours from now, if that's okay, right? It's on a spectrum. And that self-care can look like a lot of things, but that's step number one. And then step number two is not getting all into it and breaking it all down with them and talking to them all about it. And that's like step number 4 or 5. Step number 2 is then returning to presence with them, right? And just being mindfulness. Just being the practice. Right? Paying attention to yourself and them in a loving way. Yourself and them in a loving way. And that may feel somewhat frustrated because we're not doing something or saying something or solving the problem, but we're very powerfully communicating with them in those moments. Just like the child, I don't care how many times I tell the child not to drink the milk straight from the carton. If every morning I drink the milk straight from the carton, that's what the child will do. It's seeing and feeling much more than it's hearing and parsing words and memorizing things. That's not how this thing works. And so we want to radiate the practice. We want to radiate the practice. And they can see it in a meeting and how you take a drink. There's a reason why monks, for example, monks and nuns are instructed to do things with 2 hands always. Right? 2 hands. And that's why the sleeves on a lot of spiritual garments, you might notice in many traditions, have very long, wide sleeves. And that's so that if you go for something with just one hand, you need the other hand to gather the sleeve so that it's not in the way or it's not going to dip into the sauce at the meal. Right? And then you have your full attention on taking a sip of your coffee, which is beautiful, but it's also healing. And it's very healing for people just to see other people in mindfulness. And then finally, maybe step 4, step 5, after some time of that has passed, you've come to understand how their behavior triggers you, which has opened up the space for you to be able to understand like some idea of what you do and don't know about why they're triggered. Then maybe the conversation can happen. Thanks, Josiah. So the 2 things that I'd really love to hear are how anyone out there is practicing with hard gratitude. Anything anybody has to share about something in the past that they've learned from that was challenging at the time. And I'd also love to hear any of your thoughts or experiences of our talk on the middle way and the expansion, if you will, of the idea of the middle way. I have a hand.
Hello, I'm Zach from San Diego, and I don't know how many times I've heard the guitar analogy that you've said. I think at least 3 or 4 times now, but I always tend to forget it, and it's good to have that brought back into my life because that's something when I first heard it that really helped me kind of gain a little more acceptance. What I broke that down to as like an analogy in my mind is like, I'm not broken, you just need a little tuning. Need a little tuning. All guitars need to get tuned sometimes. And so it's been a while since I've heard it. I've been pretty consistent with my practice. And so it's good in this challenging time with school and friends and all that stuff for me to have that brought back into my life. So I appreciate having that again. So thank you.
Thanks, Zach. have a hand.
Bridget, Severe, and Colin joining from Ocean Beach. Can you guys hear me okay?
It's a little shaky, but we can hear you, yes.
Here for a little bit. I've been really practicing listening, which is, I found very difficult for myself. But I just wanted to say thank you for all of these teachings that build on each other each week. Last week, teaching of personal or self-love being, synonymous with self-understanding was really, really huge for me. And then coming into today's teaching of understanding the middle way where I can relate to the bouncing off the 8-lane highway. I go a lot of different directions as well. And just, coming into gratitude with that and being thankful for the crashing instead of resisting it is just like blowing my mind right now. And I think I've felt this before, but never really could piece it together with gratitude versus resistance. And if you have gratitude, you have acceptance, and it's just really nice to be able to accept the outliers and come together in the middle. So I think just and piecing together these principles have just been so helpful. And I think looking back, conditioning growing up, I heard a lot of the grass is always greener on the other side, and it's not. It's greener where you water it. And I'm just thinking all these things, that I may be watering that I don't necessarily need any longer. And so thank you, because I cannot wait to journal and just get all of these thoughts out of my head and onto a piece of paper, and then move forward with practicing and being so much more mindful of, you spoke of food, but people and, activities I choose to do or don't do based off of the principles of, where I want to water and where necessarily I kind of want that seed in that plant to kind of go back to the basement. So thank you always, and appreciate your guys' time listening, because I know it's difficult.
Thank you, Bridget. Hi, Rob. I know Bridget likes to spend a lot of time outside. And so I'll share a quick practice, right? Because the 4 practice of right diligence is kind of involved, right? So here's a very simple one that can bring us to the same place of gratitude. Wherever you are, and we can do it right now. If we were in a workshop, right? I do these workshops every other month. That's basically the difference between the workshops and the Sangha, is that in between the talk and the Q&A, we do the practice. That's the difference. I put it very simply for those of you who haven't been to a workshop in a while. So one of my favorite ways to touch a moment of gratitude is just to ground myself with intentionality and love to the earth. So it doesn't matter whether I'm standing, sitting, or lying down. We can do it right now. We can just feel the earth underneath us. And stop pretending that the tile or the wood floor has any permanence to it. And remember that what we're really being held by right now is Mother Earth. She is supporting the foundations of all the buildings we can see. She is pushing up out of herself the food that we need to eat. She is helping our most precious resource of water just rain down clean upon us. And she's asking for absolutely nothing in return. And our relationship to the earth is one of the easiest, most tangible examples in our life of unconditional love. And when it's all done and we're back to dust, the earth just takes us back in like that, like we never left. That's a way to touch gratitude. A gratitude that could never be repaid, right? I could spend the whole rest of my life hugging trees and serving Mother Earth, and I could never say a sufficient thanks for all this. And so we can just touch that anytime we want. Anytime we want. Thanks, Bridget. We have time for maybe one more share. Quick question. I have a hand. We're not hearing you, Sam. You're unmuted, but the microphone isn't on or something. If you go down to the bottom left, if you're on a laptop where the microphone icon is, and hit it and see which microphone is selected. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Thanks for trying. All right. We have another hand sneaking in.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Yes,
we can.
Cool. This is Charles calling from Mexico City. I'm kind of a quotes guy or saying guy, so I wanted to just drop something in. It's really helped me that I think might be useful for the group here. You mentioned like heart gratitude. One thing that, actually two things really. And we actually talked about this the other day, Dave, but it's one is the obstacle is the way, right? Like kind of a heart gratitude. But I shouldn't say always, but in the last couple of years, I've kind of adopted the attitude of, what if the worst thing that happened to me is the best thing that happened to me? So it's kind of spinning and being grateful for those shitty things that come up, and like in the moment they suck and you're like, oh man, this is never going to end. This is the worst thing ever. But like you said, there's always a lesson to be learned from it. And if you focus on kind of what that lesson is or that growth opportunity, then you're like, that wasn't so bad when you look back at it. It's just the going through it during the time is sometimes the challenging part. But like you say, like the wave will pass, right? There'll be another wave. So just wanted to share that with everybody.
Thank you, Charles. Wonderful additional support to end on. So much of our suffering is caused by our relationship to time. Right? We produce a tremendous amount of false urgency because we experience time in our minds through a very narrow lens. As things are happening, right, we have this idea, this felt experience that, oh my God, this is crazy. I have to solve this problem right now, today. Right? We have a very short view in the moment. But then later, right, 10 years later, when we're talking about that same experience with our partner who was there, right, we talk about it in very broad strokes. We can't even really remember the details of what exactly happened and when and who said what and what was done, right? What can we remember 10 years in the future? Right? We remember these really broad movements, right? These really big waves like, oh yeah, that month, that was crazy. Yeah, when grandpa got sick and oh yeah, and then there's like 2 months in there. I don't even know what happened. Remember? But we don't give ourselves that space when things are actually happening. And so thank you, Charles, for the reminder that we can expand time. We can just keep expanding time. One of the ways my teacher has invited us to practice this way, the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, is when he encounters somebody in a distress, he likes to ask them the question, oh, this thing, this difficulty that you've just described to me, will any of it matter 300 years from now? Is any of it on that scale? Will anyone even remember that any of these events took place 300 years from now? Is it important at all? Right. Expanding time, right? Not in a rejection, right? I love the question because he's not saying like, what you're talking about is meaningless crap. He's not saying that, right? What he's saying is you are pretending to yourself because of emotions you're experiencing that this is the most important thing in the world, that it's a crisis. And that's not really true. Take a step back. Give yourself the space that is normally real, that is normally true. Maybe we'll end on that note. Thank you all so much for being here, supporting the Sangha. As always, I'm going to throw a little text in there that basically says what I think all of you already know. Sangha is run by donation, that your presence here is a very, very welcome and lovingly received donation. But should you want to donate in a financial way as well, there are ways on my website to do that one-off or to become a patron. Support me with a monthly donation and then get access to the recordings of these sanghas, discounts for workshops and other cool stuff. But really the important thing is that I'm so grateful that you're here. Like we've been talking about so much, every guitar needs a lot of tuning. It needs a lot of love and support and appreciation and care. And I'm so grateful for all of that I get from the Sangha, not just on these Sundays, but all the time. I feel you with me all the time. So thank you. And our new fun thing is we're ending by me inviting everybody to unmute. So if you want to, you can say an audible goodbye to the Sangha, to the gang.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you next
Thank
week.
you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a
Namaste.
great weekend. Travel safely.